Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Post Up with David Grubb here on Boo Crew Media. I, of course, am David Grubb. Thank you for joining me. Today, we're going to dive into the results of the 2025 NBA Draft Lottery, what they mean for the New Orleans Pelicans. Look, you know the deal. Last night, the Pelicans entered the lottery with the fourth best chance at landing the top pick and securing the rights to select Cooper Flagg, the presumptive number one overall pick in this year's draft. However, the ping pong balls just didn't bounce the way New Orleans would like. The Pelicans fell 3 spots, ending up with the 7th overall pick in the upcoming draft. This is the first time since selecting Zion Williamson in 2019, though, that the Pelicans will pick within the top 7. The drop is disappointing, especially considering the team's need to get deeper, to inject itself with some high-level talent. After this season, 21-61, so disappointing, so plagued with injuries and underperformance. This is not a disaster, though, ever. Let's step back from the ledge, everybody. The Pelicans do have an opportunity still to add a valuable piece to their young core and can still be a major player in this year's draft. So we'll explore the history of the 7th overall pick. We'll discuss the options that the Pelicans do have, whether they choose to build for some immediate success around Zion Williamson, or if they start making that shift to focus on their long-term path forward. All right. So let's take a look at some of those recent 7th picks. And actually, the recent history of the 7th pick has been pretty good. When you look at the last 13 7th overall picks, it's easy to look at like 10 of those being very solid NBA players. Start with last year's pick, Donovan Clingan, who went to Portland. Last year, he played in 67 games, averaged 6.5 points, 8 rebounds, 37 starts, 8 double-doubles. He'll likely be a member of the all-rookie team. Bilal Coulibaly, 2 years ago, 12 points in his career, 12 points last season, 5 boards, 3 assists, and a career 31% shooter. He looks like a building block for the Wizards. Shaedon Sharpe, who's advanced very rapidly in 3 seasons to be someone that last season the Pelicans were entertaining trading Brandon Ingram for to Portland. Averaged 9.9 points as a rookie, up to 18.5 points this past season, and a career 33% three-point shooter. Look at a guy like Jonathan Kuminga, who had his role reduced when Jimmy Butler came to Golden State. But Kuminga this offseason could attract a lot of free agent attention and has really increased his value in the playoffs in the absence of Steph Curry. Killian Hayes bust for the Detroit Pistons. He's now in the G League trying to find his game back. But at the 7th pick at the time, a lot of people were high on Killian Hayes. Kobe White, Wendell Carter, back-to-back picks by the Chicago Bulls at the time. Kobe White still with the Bulls, a guy that has torched the New Orleans Pelicans when he's played them, has developed into a very respected scorer in the NBA and a guy who looks like his career is still on the upside. Wendell Carter has had some injury concerns, but has been a very solid player in the NBA so far. Lauri Markkanen, a potential target for the New Orleans Pelicans this offseason. Also a number 7 pick. At the time, he was taken by the Minnesota Timberwolves and now with the Utah Jazz. A couple of teams later, played in Chicago and now in Utah. A 20-point-per-game scorer. He was one of the players, one of the fastest players in league history to get to 153-point makes coming into the league. Jamal Murray. Certainly the Pelicans fans know Jamal Murray, taken just ahead of Buddy Hield. Taken just behind Buddy Hield. Some people view that as a mistake for the Pelicans in drafting, but Jamal Murray, a guy who's had a number of exciting playoff performances, a career 20-point-per-game scorer. Then you get to another mistake, another couple of mistakes. Emmanuel Mudiay and Ben McLemore, sandwiched between Julius Randle, who played for the Pelicans for a brief time, made couple of All-NBA teams with the New York Knicks, and has now refound himself with the Minnesota Timberwolves and could be a major off-season target this year. And finally, Harrison Barnes, who continues to play well into this stage of his career, has been another player who has burned the Pelicans at times, a consistent 3-and-D stretch 4 throughout his career, and an NBA champion as well. So there isn't a disaster in what is a deep draft, a very talented draft, and a number of prospects that the Pelicans could target. We'll go through those names, and we'll see if any of those excite you, okay? So the first guy we got to look at is Kon Knueppel, and he's somebody that I've mentioned. It was somebody who's mentioned in our chat when we were doing our live reaction show to the lottery on Monday night. Kon Knueppel, a guy who won the ACC Tournament Most Valuable Player Award, 6'7", sharpshooting wing, high basketball IQ, very versatile, can play either the 2 or the 3 spot. Not super athletic, but also not a slouch athletically either. During his freshman year at Duke, he has really repeatable shooting mechanics. He doesn't look like a guy who's a streak shooter. If you look at him, he could have been, if we weren't looking at Cooper Flagg, Connor Knippel could have been, in many regards, the best freshman in the ACC. And that's including guys like Derek Queen. So there was a high level of potential and production from Connor Knippel. I think the thing that Connor Knippel, I think when people look at him is how high is his ceiling? I don't know. I don't know how high you're going to project his ceiling if you're only focusing on his athleticism. But let's be real here. I'm not saying he is Luka Doncic, but we've seen players like a Luka Doncic who are not great athletically, but if they understand how to get to their spots and they are efficient in that, you can still score. And I think Connor Knippel has shown that he's an efficient. He doesn't waste his dribbles. He doesn't try to do things that he can't do. He stays within himself on the basketball court. So you saw him contribute on both ends of the floor for Duke, offensively and defensively. He was not a liability for them defensively, for one of the best defensive teams that we've seen in college basketball in recent memory. He could complement everybody on the Pelicans' current roster. He's a guy who can, be a connector as a passer. He's a guy who's not going to be afraid to take shots in big moments. He's not going to shy away from the responsibility of leadership. You saw that. His skill set is a complement to the roster. As I said, he can be a spacer and a playmaker. So there's a lot of potential there with Connor Knippel. The other player from Duke that people will be looking at is Kaman Maluak, 7'2". I think there is some concern about his athleticism. You look at his results from the draft combine so far, and his height checks out, his weight checks out, his jumping ability checks out. He's kind of like a bigger, stronger Rudy Gobert, but not necessarily great in pick and roll situations. If that's the biggest problem, though, is that he's not great in pick and roll situations, I'm not really super concerned about that. And here's why I'll say why. Because the criticism of Rudy Gobert, actually, he's a better pick and roll defender than you think. Go look at the numbers. Rudy Gobert is actually a very solid pick and roll defender. Even though you look at him and you say, that guy can't move his feet. He actually can move his feet. It's just in what situations are you asking him to do so? At the same time, I don't want my 7'2" center doing a lot of side-to-side movements, shuffling his feet, trying to pick up wing defenders. I really don't. If you're taking somebody like Kaman Maluak, what I'm asking him to be is the anchor in the last line of defense, to be the guy that I use my perimeter players to funnel offensive players towards, and let his size and physicality be the deterrent at the rim. He can shot block very well. His rebound rate, and I think that's the thing you have to look at with power forwards and centers, is what is their rebounding rate? Because that transfers over. One of the most transferable talents from college basketball to professional basketball is rebounding. Players that tend to rebound at a high rate in college tend to rebound at a high rate in the NBA. I'll say this because I remember when Jahlil Okafor came out from Duke, and I loved, and I still to this day think Jahlil has one of the most sublime and beautiful offensive games that we've seen in a post player in a very long time. But Jahlil couldn't play defense and could not rebound at a high level. And if you go back and you look at his numbers at Duke, it showed that he was not a great rebounder or a great defender. So that thing that followed him from college to the NBA, he never really was able to fix. I think he's still working on that in the G League now and trying to get back to the league, but it's something that just was not a natural skill set for him. For Kaman Maluak, that skill set is there as a defender and as a rebounder. He gets it instinctively. And shot blocking a lot of times, and I like to talk about this when you talk about what's the difference between a rim protector and a shot blocker. I think that there are guys who simply, are really good at blocking shots. I think when I think of Anthony Davis, I've always said that Anthony Davis is a shot blocker more so than a rim protector, because there are times physically where you can go right into the chest of Anthony Davis and knock him off his spot, even though he is a very good shot blocker. But what you want out of a guy like Kaman Maluak is that he takes up that space and he's hard to move off of his spot. If he is in that post, you're not just pushing him out of the way. He is built to hold down the center position. He is a legitimate 7'2" center. So I think if you are simply focused, if that becomes your goal is you want to improve your interior defense and rebounding, and that's the guy you go with, there are still there are far worse options than Kaman Malawak. I think what it would necessitate is if you take somebody like him, is I think you need to package Yves Missi as part of another deal, because you don't need two of those types together. As good as Yves Missi was last season, Malawak is a more physically gifted player as far as protecting the paint. And I think he can give you the same type of offensive production, which for Yves was very inconsistent last season. I think Malawak can give you that. And at 7'2", and his physical frame is bigger than Yves at this stage, I would say he gives you a more imposing physical presence and a better finisher, because one of the things that was a concern for Yves is going up for dunks and getting blocked around the rim. That doesn't happen with Malawak. His arms are longer. His body frame is that you can add more muscle to him. He looks like, and assuming his age is his age, but he looks like a more fully developed athlete at this stage in his career. VJ Edgecombe, though I view it highly unlikely that Edgecombe slides to 7, you don't know now, and we'll get into this because of the number of teams that did drop in front of the Pelicans. We'll talk about that in a minute, but just focusing on the players right now. Let's say if VJ Edgecombe does drop to 7 for whatever reason, because, if you are the Charlotte Hornets, do you want another 19-year-old to go with the core that you already have that is very young? You may, but you also may be trying to really make a jump for the playoffs if you're trying to keep LaMelo Ball long term. So you need to get some veterans around him that are consistent contributors that you don't have to focus on developing a young player. We know what Edgecombe can do. You know what guys like Trey Johnson, I don't think Trey Johnson falls, but there's a third Duke player that you could look at, Isaiah Evans, who played very well defensively for Duke. Not a very polished offensive player, but at 6'7", he gives you the ability to guard multiple positions. He can defend well. He could be a role player for the Pelicans. It would be disappointing for fans. It's not the sexiest pick. You're not going to rush out and get Isaiah Evans jerseys. But if you're looking for a player who fits what Joe Dumars is looking for, a kid who's going to come in and not be a problem, a kid who's going to work hard, a kid who's going to contribute and put his head down and put his nose to the grindstone and be that kind of physical, tenacious defender, you can't go wrong with Isaiah Evans. There's a couple other players that you could look at that have this kind of skill sets, but as we get deeper into the draft process and start figuring out where teams are looking, we can go into those players. But I think that what we're seeing is that there's a talent available. Okay. There's a lot of talent available. And then on top of that, you have options at that 7th pick. So the Pelicans have to decide on what their strategy is going to be going forward. Because, again, with the Dallas Mavericks at the top, they're going to take Cooper Flagg. There's been some talk that could the Mavericks decide, hey, or do you want to trade that Cooper Flagg pick? I would say that there's no way Dallas trades that pick. The politics of this are bigger than, let's say, just taking a player. I think when you look at this in the grand scope of things, the last time an American-born white player was taken number 1 overall was 1974, Bill Walton. 1974. Dallas has gone from Dirk Nowitzki to Luka Doncic, and now the opportunity to take Cooper Flagg. And I think there's no way, if you're Dallas, given this gift by the NBA, whether you view it as a conspiracy or as you view it as just pure luck, when you take this gift, if you're Dallas, you don't give that gift away. At 2, San Antonio, this is good for the Pelicans. Why would I say that? Because it does suck that 2 of your division rivals jumped ahead of you and get the number 1 and 2 spots. Yes, it does. But it feels like some of these things were, as far as the Dallas one is more of I think a gut kick than the Spurs. Because the Spurs actually thing kind of helps you. Because the impetus now in the Spurs in year 3 of Victor Wembanyama is they have to start winning. The Spurs have been, for a long time, viewed as one of the favorites if Giannis Antetokounmpo And it seems that Giannis is open to exploring his options now as a potential destination for Giannis. So if you're the Spurs and now you have this second pick, you have something to negotiate with when you go beyond the talent that you already have. And the Pelicans, being that third team to partner, owning those Milwaukee picks that the Bucks would like to get back, their position is enhanced. So in the short term, if you're the Pelicans, while you are not going to get Giannis Antetokounmpo, the price that you can get back from either the Spurs or the Bucks seems to have gone up. Because if these two teams are desperate to make a deal, if the Spurs really have to have Giannis and put together that front line, which, again, it sucks if you're the Pelicans. In the short term, if you're the Pelicans, what you're looking at is the leverage. How do you use this in your favor? So what if you want that number 2 pick this year and you're the Pelicans? You still have the ability to get that. You say, look, the Spurs get Giannis, right? The Pelicans get the 2 pick this year, can still get Dylan Harper that they want. You give the Bucks their picks back, and you let the other parts figure out where they may, but you have still secured that 2 pick by facilitating this deal. And yes, in the short term, it makes you feel like, okay, we're going to lose to the Spurs over and over again for the next couple of years, but it could start the impetus for what your long-term vision for this team is, because you've now got your point guard of the future in Dylan Harper. And you can start building that group around Zion Williamson. And I think that you still have a talented team there in most regards. You weren't supposed to be in the lottery this year. Your 21 wins happened due to all those factors we already talked about, injuries and incompetence and underachievement and all those things that put you at 21, but you weren't supposed to be at 21. At 21 wins. You weren't supposed to be drafting in the top 4. So to find yourself still in position to jump back in, which I think the Pelicans are still in position to jump back in, that's not a disaster. That's an opportunity. How do you play it? So I think that puts the onus on a Joe Dumars to say, how big of that Trader Joe reputation are we going to get? If you go to Twitter, you'll see Justin Napoli put out a post talking about Troy Weaver's history and that Troy Weaver always makes deals in the draft. He is always aggressive about making deals in the draft. I think we saw in Joe Dumars' tenure in Detroit, he was aggressive about making deals in the draft. Bryson Graham has certainly been part of a Pelicans team that has been aggressive in making deals in the draft and trying to identify the players that they want. So I don't think that this means the Pelicans, I think there's no indication that the Pelicans are going to sit back and just let the draft fall to them at 7. I think there's very strong possibilities that the Pelicans are going to be one of the most important teams still in this draft because of the power that they hold over Milwaukee and their ability to facilitate these deals, and the fact that they still have players that they can move, like CJ McCollum, like DeJounte Murray, like Kelly Olynyk, who they can move those players as pieces to get more picks in return for years ahead, or to get talent right now to help this team. Okay, it could be far worse than it is. I know the immediate reaction and the feeling of disappointment that comes in and watching this team plummet in the draft a few spots. But to go from 4 to 7 in this draft, in this year, it could have been worse. It could have been another year where the draft was far less deep, where the teams that jumped ahead of you were the wrong teams. The right teams in a lot of ways jumped in front of you, and the right teams fell because everybody in the top 4 lost at least one draft spot. The Hornets dropped from 3 to 4. The Jazz, dropped from 1 to 5. And then the Wizards dropped from 2 to 6. So where do they go when we think about right now? Where do the Jazz go with that? Do the Jazz want to make that 5th pick? Could you jump back up to 5 and swap picks with the Jazz? I don't think that the Wizards want to particularly make that 6th pick. Does it make them better? Are there players on the Wizards roster or the Jazz roster that you can go after? Are you in a better position to go after Lauri Markkanen now because the Jazz are now going to have to do a complete rebuild after wasting the last couple of seasons anticipating that they were going to get the number 1 pick this year? Teams are going to get desperate because they have to make moves. And with the amount of players veteran players who are already rumored to be on the chopping block. Add into that the urgency of now that comes from what's happening in the playoffs. Look at the Boston Celtics, who, by all accounts, who are going to lose their semifinal series to the New York Knicks. They've lost Jason Tatum to an apparent Achilles injury. The Celtics are going to have to blow it up. With that salary that they have, the amount of salary that they have, new ownership coming in who's not going to want to foot the bill for an injured team, and a team that likely will watch its championship window close while it waits for Jason Tatum to recover as he misses an entire season over the next year. The amount of money that they owe a guy like Jaylen Brown, the amount of money they owe to Derek White, the amount of money they owe to Drew Holiday, the injuries that have built up with Kristaps Porzingis, the age of Al Horford, and the questions around Joe Mazzulla's coaching. The Celtics are no longer a safe bet. So that team could be dismantled. The Cleveland Cavaliers, and the story on them will be, it doesn't matter if they go 82-0. I've heard it said. It doesn't matter if they go 82-0 next year because no one's going to believe in the Cavs because they've watched them melt down in the playoffs in 2 consecutive seasons. Their backcourt is simply too small. And they don't have the kind of toughness on the bench that helps them in the postseason. You've watched them basically get beat up by the Indiana Pacers, a team that's been more physical, more direct to the point of attack, and is a team that seems far more confident on a night-to-night basis than the Cavs has been in the playoffs. So what happens to the Cavs? Is Darius Garland now in play for a team like New Orleans to go out and find a point guard for the short term? If you cannot get to that spot in the draft, maybe you're using that 7th pick and using it as part of a package to secure Darius Garland. And you send CJ McCollum and picks for that expiring contract, send him to Cleveland, and you get Darius Garland in return. Would that make you happy as a Pelicans fan? It just might. So there are just a number of options, even as you look at in the Western Conference. And because of these things, these shifting tides with the teams jumping up to the top, now how more competitive does the West become in trying to make deals to keep up with whatever's going to happen with San Antonio and whatever's going to happen with Dallas? Because Dallas still has to make moves with Kyrie Irving out with a knee injury, with Anthony Davis. He'll be back on the roster next year, it appears, but Dallas still has to flesh this roster out itself. They still have moves that they need to make with all the injuries that they had last season. They're still exposed in certain areas on their rosters, just not having enough depth and enough talent. So there's going to be so many teams looking to be aggressive. Does this make the Ja Morant deal more enticing for the New Orleans Pelicans in the short term? Does it make it more enticing for the Memphis Grizzlies in the short term? It just might. This will be such an impactful and hectic offseason in the NBA that I think it's very short-sighted to just look at the results of the lottery and think that the season is over before it even begins, that the offseason will be a loss before it even begins. The potential for success is still there. And the image of Zion Williamson sitting there in New York, sitting at the lottery on behalf of the Pelicans, representing them, wearing his Pelicans shirt, his polo, smiling and acknowledging the excitement that he had in 2019. If you've solved that, and Zion, again, it's only a few weeks past the end of the season, but he didn't look like he's picked up any weight. It doesn't look like he's gone into the offseason and started eating immediately or anything like that. It doesn't feel like he's gotten off his training schedule. If you still haven't a motivated, and by your moves, you can help motivate Zion Williamson too and show what this commitment is going to be, you still have a lot of options available to the Pelicans. And if you're looking towards the future, the 2026 NBA draft is probably more talented than this draft. So what will the Pelicans' options be in a year from now? Because if you decide, let's say the Pelicans still do decide to move Zion this offseason, and I think that that's a legitimate possibility that they still could. I don't think it's a guarantee that Zion stays because, again, the right offer comes to you and everything is back on the table. If one team can make you the perfect offer for Zion Williamson, then you have to listen. But I would say this, the 2026 draft, looks very good as far as the amount of talent. You already have the presumptive number one player in AJ DeBonsa, who's going to BYU, 6'9" small forward, who people are already looking at him as one of the most talented prospects we've seen in a decade. You know, guys, there's a lot more length and athleticism in next year's draft than this year's, because you look at this year's draft, it's a lot of guys who are 6'4" and 6'5", and some bigs who are primarily feel like tweeners. Are they power forwards? Are they centers? Are they small forwards? Are they power forwards? There's a lot of those this year. But next year, you're looking at guys at the top of the draft, 6'9", 6'9", 6'9", 6'10", 6'6", 6'5", 6'10", 6'6", 6'8". From the top 10 prospects already looking ahead to next year. A much taller draft, which also, interesting enough, includes Dash Daniels, Dyson Daniels' younger brother. Dash, that's a cool name. Dash Daniels, a 6'6" shooting guard who could play the point as well. So, I mean, it's a very deep draft next year. So if the Pelicans decide to take on assets this year, if they say we're going to trade Zion, we're going to trade DeJounte, we're going to trade CJ, we're going to get all of our veterans off this roster, and we're looking to our future with whomever we pick in 2025, Trey Murphy, and you're trading Herb Jones. You're getting all these veteran guys off the deck, and you're looking towards the future, and you're trying to amass assets for the future. The path ahead is still full of optimism as far as I'm concerned, because there is so much talent coming up in 2026 and 2027. You have guys like Cameron Boozer. You have players like Elijah Arenas, who you've been watching now for years and hearing about how talented they are. We'll see if that plays out on the collegiate level for the 1 year that they're there. But we've heard about how good and how gifted these young men are. So I think it's very easy to be disappointed, and I understand. But I will say this, again, with the history of the Pelicans, the two times in their draft history that they fell back, they were supposed to be second in 2005. They ended up falling to fourth, and they ended up with Chris Paul. That didn't turn out to be a disaster. You know, the other time that they fell, it didn't turn out to be a disaster. So, you know, I just think that the Pelicans can make this work. I think that they can find their way. Like I said, the other drop was what? They fell one spot and ended up taking Nerlens Noel in 2013, trading Nerlens Noel for Drew Holiday. So I think that the moves are going to be made. The Pelicans are going to be aggressive. I think that the falling of those other teams, and that remains my key here, is that if this had been in a vacuum and it was just the Pelicans falling from 4 to 7, that would feel really bad. But knowing that all of those competitors that you had for that top pick fell as well, and at the teams that jumped above, Philly as well at 3, a team that would like to add young talent, but Philly may be looking at an overhaul to build around Tyrese Maxey. You know, you hear the reports about Joel Embiid and the possibility that his career could be completely done. What are the Sixers going to do with that third pick? Are they interested in acquiring veteran talent because they have been so close to really putting something together? Or are they starting to think about a long-term rebuild after going all in for a number of years on their tanking method and trying to build around Joel Embiid? If you're the Pelicans, what you have to be is savvy about this. You cannot be desperate. If Joe Dumars goes out and he's begging teams to make a deal because he wants to make something happen immediately for the Pelicans, I think the Pelicans end up with the raw end of the stick, the short end of the stick. But if Joe Dumars is calculated, and Troy Weaver and the rest of the brain trust, if they look at this landscape, there's a way for them to win this. There's a way for the Pelicans to be in a much better position come the fall than they are sitting today. And I would tell you that 7 can be very lucky for the Pelicans rather than a disappointment. All right, that'll do it for today. We'll be back again and do this again on Thursday. So make sure you make sure you subscribe, leave your comments and your questions below. I have appreciated hearing from you guys. I've appreciated your feedback. It's helped me a lot in just putting these segments together and giving you what you want to hear. So please make sure you do that. Like, subscribe, comment, share this with other Pelicans fans who may need some talking down. All right. I think let's view this episode as a cup of warm tea with a blanket around your shoulders to comfort you in this time of stress. It's going to be, hopefully, it'll be okay. I think that there are indicators that it can be. All right, folks, you know how to follow me on social media at DM Grub, whether you're looking at X or Instagram. You can also find me on TikTok. You can find me on Blue Sky as well at David Grubb on Blue Sky. So until the next time, this has been the Post Up with David Grubb on Boot Crew Media. Y'all have a great afternoon, great day, and we'll talk to you again on Thursday.